Hello everyone, welcome back to the second week of Roundup video. This week we have Carol who is joining us, and we are going to go over some of the comments that we saw on the forum. So first of all, this week we have seen what climate has done and influenced to our vernacular architecture, and we have asked for some examples of building rituals and ceremonies and built form and environments in each and every of your local environment. And we found many good examples. For those of you who haven't seen these examples on the forum, we strongly recommend you to go back and take a look. To name a few successful examples, we saw there is a elevated house in Florida that avoids flooding. We saw a student posting from India with an example of Kashmiri hammam, which is a heated floor for the use in winter. And we also have example from northern India, where in a site along the old Silk Route, with the upper level being the summer level and the bottom level being the winter level. All of these are very interesting and local examples of how climate could affect building design and decision made to our built form that surrounds us. In terms of building rituals and ceremonies, we have examples from Japan, Ji-Chin-sai, which is an open ground ceremony before construction kickstarts. We have another ceremony from India called Bhumi Pocha, which is another land blessing ceremony, where a pot of milk is to be boiled until it overflows eastwards. So these are all very interesting examples, and we thank you for sharing your wonderful images, and please continue to do so in the future episode. So going back to a few more debatable questions. This week we asked if endangered material of construction of vernacular buildings should still be used, such as the cypress trees in Japan for building Shinto temples. Despite the nature of these very open-end questions, we found one student's comment being a very quite inspiring and debatable questions from Theo Nan. So here goes the answer. Theo Nan thinks that as designer, the moral responsibility is more important to keep the endangered species sustainable rather than keeping the vernacular architecture sustainable. So I think we would take this chance to discuss a little bit about what our TAs thinks about endangered material versus vernacular architecture.
In these questions, we think that it's involved different kind of concepts. Not only about vernacular architecture, it's more about sustainability and environmental friendly issues. But we think about that, is it the materials part of the main issue for the vernacular architecture, but it's not for the all of the issues of the vernacular architecture. Maybe this kind of trees is represent special meanings, but is it the only spirit of vernacular architecture for using these materials? And then we think that material can be replaced by other supplements. We call it supplements. Maybe it can be replaced by other kind of wood, but the most important thing is the spirit behind this kind of material using, or how it construct, or the construction methods. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, and when we think about vernacular architecture and one of the concepts that we'll get into later on, which is the 3 levels of meaning, and what that means to vernacular architecture and how we attribute meaning to these built forms. I think one of the things that we really consider, not just the building material itself, but what the form is and the techniques and what the ceremonies that are performed within these buildings and performed around these structures. And so when we talk about sustainability and whether or not we should continue to use the cypress tree for this temple, I think this is an issue that can be taken case by case, and for the people that are closely related to this type of activity, for them to make this decision. And I think in terms of how we as outsiders interpret what they are doing there, it's difficult for us to be able to attribute and to kind of imbue our own sense of values. I think this is something that needs to come from those people who are very, very closely involved with it. And I think that's something that, as history has gone on, people have done themselves, and they've been able to identify ways of changing and ways of adapting to the local environment and to the context. So I believe that this should be tackled at a very local and specific level, as a personal opinion.
So, in essence, this is not a blanket statement that can covers all the scenarios. And one very good example could be the Taolo in Fujian, where the term Tulo, the Tu is already the earth of the building. So when we eliminate the earth, would the building remains as the same vernacular building? So that's something we can think about, and we will keep discussing this in the future episode. So coming to another very heated debate in this week, we have Layered, who came back from our previous one of our previous participant as well, giving us a very in-depth analysis of our teaching this time. So Layered mentioned that this module this week, he find it quite a troubling module, because he found that there is the term, the definition of vernacular has somewhat been destroyed from our use of Shinto Temple as an example to demonstrate what vernacular architecture is. Because in the previous week, we discussed it that vernacular architecture should be of something that common people live and where they work. So maybe Edwin and Abdul, we can talk a little bit about what you think on this note.
Yeah, I think for the temple, of course, we should understand that, for instance, in Hong Kong, in New Territory, in those village community, they have temple as well. And building those temple is part of the village people's belief and their tradition. They are part of, physically, they are part of the village setting. So if you take the temple out, that would eliminate the belief or the tradition of that certain village. But coming back to the Shinto Temple that we mentioned in the video, of course, this way we are addressing the issues of the climate and building technique. So the Shinto Temple is one of the best surviving example that in Asia that we could found, that to show us about how the building technique was being passed down from one generation to a generation, and how the local builder kept that certain construction method and make it. Nowadays we can still sort them. So, and from the construction point of view, and those builders who are building this temple, at the same time thinking also build the normal house for the people. So I think there is no such straight borderline between to define the temple whether it is not vernacular or not. So like Peter said, we should look at a certain example and look at them and then to interpret them.
Yeah, I think something that quite happy to see Layered coming back to our class from last year, and I think this is something that we really appreciate here, is this this system of checks and balances where the learners are always holding us accountable as tutors, and so we really appreciate this feedback. And And I think to Layard's comment that we should focus on the local techniques that are still being used today, such as rammed earth. I think that's a valid talk, and actually we will go into this in the later courses, which I think he will remember, he or she will remember from last year as we go on and talk about building materials and we talk about tradition versus modernity. This topic will come up, and we will discuss how people use modern day techniques and modern day building materials, which we can still consider vernacular. So this topic will come up again, and we will give a shout out to Layard once we get to that point as well, I'm sure.
Okay, so this concludes our comments and feedbacks in this week 2 roundup video. And once again, we really appreciate all the efforts to share about your local environment and all the comments and questions posted on the forum. And please continue to do so, and we will see you next week.